Never feel like some problems are just too tangled, too rooted to even know where to start? Like, where do you even begin to untangle that mess? Well, today we're diving into a system that's designed to tackle exactly those kinds of problems, especially for young people facing some really, really tough situations. We're looking at multisystemic therapy, MST for short. And I'll be honest, when I first heard about it, I thought, okay, another therapy approach, got it. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized this is different. So, to kick things off, what exactly makes MST stand apart from other approaches?
What makes MST so fascinating is that it recognizes that a young person's behavior, especially when we're talking about challenging behaviors, isn't happening in a vacuum, right? It's
Hmm.
not just about them. It's a response to and influenced by their whole environment. We're
Right.
talking family, friends, the school they go to, even the neighborhood they live in. And MST dives headfirst into that whole ecosystem.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But
Yeah.
how does that actually play out in practice?
Yeah.
Because it can't just be like talk therapy in an office, right?
You're right. It's definitely not your typical therapy session. It's very hands-on.
Hmm.
We're talking about therapists conducting actual home visits, going to the school with the kid, even spending time in the neighborhood, just getting a feel for what's going on. They're virtually on call 24/7 for these families. It's a very, very involved approach.
Wow, that's intense. What types of challenges are we talking about here that would require that level of intervention?
We're talking serious stuff. Think kids at a high risk of going down the wrong path, skipping school, getting into fights, substance abuse, even running away from home.
Okay, yeah, that's some heavy stuff. And speaking of substance abuse, the source material mentioned MST being used in that context as well. How does that work? Is there a specific approach for substance abuse?
There is. It's called MSTSA, specifically designed to address substance abuse. And one of the things I find most interesting about MSTSA is its focus on something called contingency management.
Okay, break that down for me. What is contingency management?
Basically, it's a fancy way of saying they reward positive choices.
Yeah.
So instead of just punishing bad behavior, they're actively encouraging and reinforcing the good stuff.
I like that. That feels a lot more constructive.
Right. Let's say a teen's goal is to improve their school attendance. Instead of just consequences for skipping class, the MST therapist might work with the family to set up a reward system for each day the teen shows up, like earning extra privileges or even just spending time with friends. It's about shifting the whole dynamic.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds great in theory, but is there any evidence that it actually works?
Oh, there's data, and it's pretty compelling. Studies show MST can lead to a significant reduction in rearrest and incarceration rates, something like 42% to 54%, which is huge.
Wow, that is a significant impact. But is it just about keeping them out of trouble, or does it go deeper than that?
It goes much deeper.
Hmm.
MST has also been shown to reduce repeat offenses, which is huge, and it even tackles issues like emotional disorders and delinquency head-on.
That's really impressive. It sounds like they're getting to the root causes, not just slapping a Band-Aid on the surface level symptoms, which is so important.
Precisely. And that's what makes MST so powerful. It's not just about addressing a single issue in isolation. It's about understanding that behavior is a complex web of influences. And to create lasting change, you have to address the entire system.
The source material did mention the cost of MST, which I know can be a concern for families who might already be struggling. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, it's a valid concern, and it did come up. While MST is an investment, it's often less expensive than other forms of intervention, like hospitalization for mental health crises, which can be incredibly costly.
That's a good point. Healthcare costs, as we know, are all over the place, but I was surprised to learn that a single night in the hospital for psychiatric care can cost anywhere from $700 to $1,000. That adds up so quickly.
It absolutely does.
Mm.
And when you consider that the average hospital stay for a teenager in these situations is around 11 nights, you're talking about a significant financial burden on families.
Exactly. So when you compare that to the cost of MST, which on average is about $5,500 per family, it really puts things into perspective, especially if MST is more effective at preventing those situations down the road.
Absolutely. And remember, the whole goal of MST is to equip these young people and their families with the tools and support they need to thrive long term, which can prevent future issues and even greater costs in the long run.
So we've talked about the intensity of MST, how it addresses the whole system, even the cost effectiveness compared to other interventions. But how do we know if it's actually working? How do you even begin to measure success in the world of MST?
That's a great question, and it's something that MST takes very seriously. They have a whole system of checks and balances in place to make sure the program is effective and that it's consistently achieving those positive outcomes we've been talking about.
Okay, walk me through that. What does that system look like?
Well, throughout the treatment process, everyone Involved in the teen's care, the therapists, supervisors, even family members, is keeping track of how the teen is doing. They're constantly monitoring progress, making adjustments along the way based on that real-time feedback and observation.
So it's a very collaborative and data-driven approach.
Exactly. And they don't just rely on subjective observations.
Yeah.
MST therapists actually use a special website, msti.org, to track results for each case. This lets them measure progress objectively across over 30 different variables and see what's working, what might need to be tweaked. It's about constant evaluation and refinement.
That's fascinating. They're constantly learning and adapting their methods based on hard data.
Precisely. And what's really interesting is that studies have shown that the closer MST providers stick to the program's model, the better the outcomes tend to be for the teams. In fact, there's evidence that strict adherence to the model can actually reduce teen incarceration rates by as much as 64%, which is incredible.
64%. Wow. That's a remarkable statistic. It really highlights the importance of what you called that fidelity to the program and just the power of evidence-based practices when it comes to creating real, lasting change.
Absolutely. It speaks to that commitment of MST providers to constantly improve their methods and get the best possible results for these young people and their families.
So, to be clear, when we're talking about fidelity to the program, we're talking about how closely they stick to the established MST methods and protocols, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not about being inflexible, but it's about recognizing that this MST model has been rigorously developed and tested over time. It's about trusting the data, trusting the decades of research that have gone into refining this approach.
That makes sense. So we've covered a lot of...
That applies to the therapy sessions as well. They'll use a variety of different therapeutic approaches from individual therapy, family therapy, to cognitive behavioral therapy to create a plan that's designed for that specific teen and their unique needs.
Right, so it's not a one-size-fits-all. They're pulling from all these different therapeutic modalities, different approaches to therapy to create that customized plan.
Exactly. And because MST recognizes that substance abuse often goes hand in hand with other behavioral issues, they also incorporate treatment for drug use or other substance use as needed.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about addressing every aspect of the teen's life and giving them the tools and the support they need to make those positive changes across the board.
Absolutely. And it's not just about talking about their problems.
Yep.
MST therapists work with teens to develop very practical skills that can help them navigate challenges, make healthier choices moving forward.
Like what kind of skills are we talking about?
It really depends on the individual, of course, but some common examples include things like anger management techniques, communication skills to help them advocate for themselves and their needs, and even things like job skills training to open up future possibilities.
Wow, so it's about empowering them with both the internal resources and the external resources that they need to succeed.
You got it. MST recognizes that lasting change requires that multifaceted approach.
This is fascinating stuff. We're getting a real sense of how comprehensive and individualized MST is. But you know what I'm curious about?
What's that?
We've talked about measuring success in this broad sense, like there's incredible statistics on reduced incarceration rates. But how does MST actually define success on an individual level? What are they looking for when it comes to that individual teen's progress?
That's a really thoughtful question.
Hmm.
And I think it's important to remember that success in MST is not one size fits all. It really depends on those goals that each teen, their family, and the therapist set together at the beginning of treatment.
So it's really a collaborative process where everyone is on the same page about what they're working towards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And while the specific goals might vary, they're generally focused on ensuring the young person's safety and helping them get back on track in their lives.
Okay, so what are some concrete examples of what that might look like? What are some signs that a teen is moving in the right direction within the MST framework?
Well, therapists will look at a variety of factors, including whether the teen is still living at home, if they're attending school or working regularly, whether they've had any further involvement with the legal system during the course of treatment.
So it's about helping them reintegrate into their families, their communities, and society as a whole, get them back on a path where they can thrive.
Exactly. It's about giving them the tools and the support to build a better future for themselves.
This is such powerful stuff. It's clear that MST is so much more than just a therapy program. It's this comprehensive system designed to create lasting change. But one of the things you said earlier really stuck with me. This importance of family involvement in MST.
Yeah, and I think we need to unpack that further because family and community support are so crucial in these situations. How MST approaches that is really at the heart of its success.
Absolutely. So when we come back, let's dive into the ins and outs of family involvement in MST and how it contributes to the program's overall effectiveness. Don't go anywhere. And we're back, continuing our deep dive into multisystemic therapy. Before the break, we were talking about how they measure success on an individual level, and I thought it was so interesting how that success is really defined by those goals that each teen, their family, Andy the therapist set together. It's not just a top-down approach.
Yeah, and that really gets to the core of how MST approaches family involvement. It's not about coming in and telling families this is what you're doing wrong or this is what you need to fix. It's about recognizing them as essential partners in this process. Remember, MST sees families not as part of the problem, but as a vital part of the solution.
I really like that. It's about shifting that whole perspective from blame to empowerment, which feels so much more constructive. But what does that partnership actually look like in action? How are families actually involved in the nitty-gritty of the MST process?
Well, it can take many forms, and that's intentional because every family is different, right?
Hmm.
Every situation has its own unique dynamics. But in general, MST therapists work very closely with families to help them develop very specific skills and strategies that are going to support their teens' progress.
So it's kind of like equipping them with this toolbox of resources, but it's tailored to their specific needs, their specific challenges, right?
You got it. It's about customization. For some families, it might be about improving communication skills, learning how to set those healthy boundaries, or developing more effective discipline techniques. It's really about giving them practical tools that they can actually use in their everyday lives.
Those are all things that I think so many families could benefit from, but especially in these situations, it can be so challenging, right? Especially when you're already under a lot of stress dealing with these issues in the first place.
Absolutely. And that's why MST therapists are there to provide that ongoing support and guidance throughout the entire process. They're not just teaching families what to do in theory, they're walking alongside them, helping them put those skills into practice in their real lives with their real challenges.
That feels so important to have that consistent support because it's one thing to like read a parenting book or something, right? And be like, okay, I get it. I should be doing this. But it's another thing entirely to actually feel equipped and empowered to use those skills, especially when things get tough in the heat of the moment.
You hit the nail on the head. And here's where it gets even more interesting. MST recognizes that it's not just about the immediate family. They understand that extended family members, friends of the family, even members of the community can play a role in a young person's life.
Oh, that's interesting. It's about creating this like wider network of support around the teen.
Exactly. It's about building that safety net, that sense of a community that cares. So MST therapists might work with families to identify those positive influences that already exist in their lives and then help them strengthen those connections.
That's brilliant. It's about leveraging those existing relationships and turning them into sources of strength and stability for the teen. Because it's true, like when you're going through something tough, it's so much easier when you don't feel alone, when you feel like you have people you can rely on.
Exactly. Because let's face it, when a young person is struggling, they need more than just one person in their corner. They need a whole team rallying around them, a community that's truly invested in their success.
And that's what MST strives to create, that sense of community and support.
You got it. It's really about recognizing that change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in the context of relationships, within families, within communities that care. It takes a village, as they say.
I love that. So we've talked about the why of family involvement in MST, this idea of empowerment and building support networks. But I'm curious, what does this actually look like in practice? Can you give us an example of how a family therapy session within MST might be different from, say, traditional family therapy?
Absolutely. Let's say you have a family where a teenager is constantly getting into trouble at school, skipping class, talking back to teachers, maybe even getting into fights. In a more traditional family therapy setting, the focus might be on things like improving communication patterns, trying to understand those underlying family dynamics, that kind of thing. And while those are all important, MST takes a more proactive problem-solving approach.
Okay, so how does that play out in this scenario? What would that look like?
So in this case, the MST therapist might work with the family and the school to really pinpoint those specific triggers for the teen's behavior. They'd be asking questions like, is there something happening in the classroom that's causing them stress? Are they struggling with a particular subject? Are there social dynamics at play here that we need to address?
So it's about understanding the context of the behavior, not just the behavior itself, right? Like what's going on in their environment that might be contributing to these actions.
Exactly. It's about getting to the root of it. And then the MST therapist will work collaboratively with the family, the teen, and even the school to develop a plan to address those triggers head on and teach the teen more positive ways to cope with those situations.
Okay, so it's very tailored and action-oriented.
Exactly. It's not just talk, it's about taking action. This might involve things like helping the teen develop better organizational skills if that's a struggle, teaching them some conflict resolution techniques, maybe even advocating for additional support services at the school if needed.
And the family is actively involved in this whole
Oh,
process.
absolutely. They're not just sitting on the sidelines observing. They're active participants in the process. They're learning alongside their teen and advocating for their needs every step of the way. It's a true team effort.
That's incredible. It sounds so thorough and so empowering for both the teen and the family.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the beauty of MST is that it doesn't just end when the formal therapy sessions are over. The goal is to create lasting change, to give these families the skills and the support systems they need to keep navigating those challenges and support their teens' growth long after the therapist is no longer directly involved.
That's such an important point, that it's not just a temporary fix. It's about building those skills for the long haul. But speaking of the therapist, I'm really curious, what kind of training and expertise does it take to be an MST therapist? It seems like they need a very particular set of skills to be effective in this role, to navigate all of those complexities.
You're absolutely right. It's a demanding role, and it requires a unique skill set. MST therapists undergo extensive specialized training. It's not just about having your typical therapy qualifications. There's a lot more to it.
So beyond the degrees and the licenses and all of that, what does that training actually involve? What does it look like to become an MST therapist?
Well, the training is incredibly thorough. They dive deep into the core principles of MST, things like really understanding those systemic influences we've been talking about, family dynamics, peer groups, community factors, all of that. But they also learn a whole range of therapeutic techniques that are specifically designed for MST with a really strong emphasis on practical application.
So not just the theory, but actually learning how to apply those techniques in those real-world, sometimes pretty chaotic situations like we've been discussing.
Exactly. They're trained to be incredibly adaptable, resourceful, and really think on their feet because remember, these therapists are going into homes, schools, even neighborhoods. It's a very different environment than a traditional therapy office. They need to be comfortable working in those different settings.
It sounds like they almost need that unique blend of clinical expertise and then also like the ability to navigate those complex social systems. It's almost like being a therapist, a social worker, and a family counselor all rolled into one.
That's a great way to put it. You need to be able to wear a lot of different hats in this role. And because MST is so data-driven, they also receive extensive training on how to monitor progress, how to track those outcomes, and how to make adjustments to the treatment plan based on real-time data. It's about being both analytical and compassionate at the same time, data-informed and relationship-focused. It's a delicate balance.
Wow, that's quite a combination. So let's say someone's listening to this and they're thinking, this MST thing sounds incredible. Where can I find out more? Where can I learn more? Get connected with resources. What's out there?
There are some great places to start. The MST Institute, which we mentioned earlier, has a wealth of information on their website, mstservices.com. You can find research articles, case studies, even a directory of MST programs across the country. It's a great resource for anyone who wants to do a deeper dive.
So a real deep dive for those who want to really dig into the research and everything.
Absolutely. And if you're maybe interested in that professional side, there's information about training and certification for aspiring MST therapists, if that's something.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
So we'll be sure to link to all of that in the show notes for anyone who wants to check it out after the show.
Mm-hmm.
But before we wrap up, I want to kind of circle back to something you said at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Yeah.
You mentioned hope being like the biggest takeaway from all of this. And I think you're right. It's
Right,
like it's so easy, especially with, the types of challenges that MST is designed to address,
Right.
to just feel overwhelmed, even hopeless at times. And what I find so inspiring about this whole approach is that it doesn't accept those limitations. It's like, you know what, there's always a way, there's always something we can do. And that, to me, it just speaks volumes,
Yeah, and I think it's really a testament to the power of really understanding, not just trying to slap a label on something or saying this is just how it is, but really meeting young people and families where they are and then giving them the tools to actually create that change.
Yeah, it's not about those, quick fixes or band-aid solutions that we see so often. It's really about investing in those long-term solutions, addressing those root causes that we
Yeah.
talked about. And ultimately, it's about building stronger families, stronger communities in the process. It has this ripple effect.
Exactly. And I think
Yeah.
that's what we really need to remember. Change is always possible, even when it seems like, things are just too far gone or too difficult. And sometimes those most effective solutions, they're the ones that actually embrace that complexity, that embrace the whole system, rather than trying to, just ignore it or pretend it's not there.
So well said. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive, and I feel like, honestly, we've only just scratched the surface of what MST is all about. But what we've uncovered today is truly remarkable. So for anyone listening out there, remember, there is hope. And sometimes that most powerful way to create real, lasting change is to look beyond just the individual and to embrace that transformative power of systems. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into multisystemic therapy. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic and another opportunity to explore the power of knowledge together.